I hope everyone is re-energized and has replenished their strength as we go to the last session. But I will now call back the panel that was responsible for GBV so that we can take resolutions on GBV. My time is limited and I know how emotive GBV is, so please, I request that we keep within the time limits because we have the last panel of the day. So I'm going to request the panel for the GBV session to come back on the podium, and then we will take resolutions from the participants because we need to know what is the way forward coming out of this conference. I'm going to welcome the panelists to come back if they're still in the room. I don't see Mr. Craig Wickelson. Josina has already left. Oh, okay, Craig will join us later, but I'll request Commissioner to come and then Mema Rumo to come as well so that we can take the resolutions, just the resolutions, what you think we must do going forward. Because if we start opening for reflection, we'll spend the whole day here speaking about gender-based violence. We need to be solution-oriented. Yes. Yeah. I'm going to also request our ushers to help us with the mics so that we can get people to speak through the mics. Thanks. Thank you. Let's remember, we don't walk past the sign language interpreter when we are speaking. Before I note the hands, I want to fix the miking situation. Can we get the 3 mics there? There are 3 mics there on the sound desk. Can I get the ushers, please, to help us? And when I note you, please, straight to the point, succinct, so that we can get as much as possible with the little time that I have. I have literally 20 minutes to do this so that we can move. So I just need you to say, this is what needs to be done. Ka. Drive the point with the little time that I have. I have noted number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. I have 4 hands so far. So I'm taking the 4 hands and I request, please, let's not walk past the sign language interpreter as we are communicating. I don't know how you're going to do it, but find another way except this one. Number 1 is that side. Can we move quickly? Number 1, to the point. Maluleke and Craig, please join us.
Chairperson, it's a challenge that we sit here and people present, then there's no reflection. Because for me, there are things that we needed to reflect first before we come with any resolution.
I understand that, but please, I'm begging, because of time constraints, can we just go to the resolutions? I get your point, but please.
But how do you resolve if you've not agreed on something? That's my issue. Because my challenge is that I've heard what the GBV panel said this morning. And some of the things that they've said, we've been saying it for the past 30 years. So they have not brought anything new. We've heard Craig telling us about Father a Nation. And where I'm seated, I've not heard Craig really telling us the role of the father. Actually, for me, it was fairy tales. What he was presenting is not rooted in the challenges that we're having in South Africa.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
So, number 1, Mayor Nkabelo spoke about the wounded nation. And I think as a country, we need to heal. Not healing post-1994. The country has been wounded before 1994. So if CGE takes that responsibility of having provincial healing sessions, because that's the first thing that we can start with. Number 2, we also need to look at programs that talks to men, that addresses the situations of men in South Africa. Not men as a gift to women. Not men washing women's feet. I mean, those are things that we're not experiencing working in communities. So 1, healing session. 2, men's programs that talks to absent men. We're not giving responsibility of raising boy children to women. They are doing it now. We've got 8 million children who don't stay with their fathers. So if we are saying men needs to be brought up, by who? So we need to be saying, we acknowledge that 8 million children stay with female-headed household. So how do we have brothers, uncles, in brackets, where they can now father these children who don't have fathers? 3, CGE as a chapter 9, you can start in government. Look at all these men who are earning money in government but not supporting their children. Because if we can start there, men will know that their children are not depending on our taxes, because SASSA is our money who are working. So we've got men who are working, but they don't pay for maintenance, and they know they can get away with it. So if we can have that, we spoke about the register for rapists. Let's look at register for men who are not taking care of their children. Because that way, they would not be sleeping around without condoms, because they know that they'll be held responsible. And lastly, you know, we always speak about evidence-based models. And until we understand what evidence-based is, because we've got a model of somebody who comes from Europe in a village of 5 people, and then they write a report and they say it's evidence-based. In a country of 60 million people, you need to understand culture, religion, customs for that model that you're using to make a difference. So I think as we going back we're dealing with dialogues in communities. Let's look at community models that talks to a specific custom and culture for us to start making a difference. So CGE for me, as we go to second conference, that conference can be a conference where we're saying we've agreed here that we'll have a healing session. We're going to hold men accountable, men who will take care of their children, and evidence-based will be models rooted in South Africa.
Thank you, ma'am. Number 2, it's the CEO here. Number 2 is here. Sorry.
Good afternoon, and firstly, Program Director, thank you to the panelists, what has been very insightful. My name is Lon Schultz, I'm the CEO for the Pan-South African Language Board, and I'm speaking in 3 respects. I think the first is as the sister Chapter 9 institution, as the head of that. Secondly, as a man, and thirdly, as a father also, because I think I have to draw inferences on all 3 of that, and I'll try and be very brief. But I just want to come back to the term that the President used referring to GBVF as a pandemic. And I was sitting thinking, Annie, better look, do we need to coin a term for it, or do we need to have a look at this in a bit more detail? But actually we have that already. And for the purpose of the audience, I think it's to our benefit to just reflect on what those 2 terms are. So the first is, and I'm just going to read what I've got here also, so that I capture the full essence. The first is gendercide. That's the globally accepted term. The other is femicide. And I just want to read what is expressed here, because I don't think we must draw too much on the fact that the President used that term, given that these are here. And the first is the term that is used to describe massive gender-based violence is gendercide. And it refers to the systematic killing or mass violence directed specifically at people because of their gender. The second one, and for the life of me, it doesn't want to open now, but it's femicide. And femicide refers to the misogynistic practice and the patriarchal practices that we have manifested in society. And it's not only reflected in one ethno group, it's reflected across society. It's pervasive in our country. And I think it's incumbent upon us to, and I agree with you, to find those resolutions. I wanted to just state two more things with your indulgence, Program Director. And I think one of the things I haven't heard is we've got this agenda not only within South Africa but within Africa of decoloniality. We've been impacted so badly since 1652 with colonial practices that manifested itself, and we had reflected on the advent of apartheid and what it has done systemically to bring our society to where it is. But I think we have to actually go back a little bit further and then say, in terms of decoloniality, what are the type of programs and interventions we're going to put in place to address it? The very last thing, very quickly, that I wanted to address, and I saw the references made to the university. I had a personal experience where somebody was abusing women. He was actually, and I must be very careful so I don't mention a name or which institutions, but he was at a certain institution. He became one of my board members. I was the CEO at this particular institution, and he tried to do the same type of exploitation against one of my staff members. We had to ask him to withdraw. He left that institution not too long afterwards. This was a university. Subsequent to that, he went into a consulting practice. He did the same thing. He then went to another university, becoming a DVC again, where the same thing happened. He had the chutzpah to contact me and to ask, haven't I got a board position available for him in my current institution, and I could not accede to that request. But what I wanted to state is that unless these institutions, what I heard earlier on, actually ensure, and I heard somebody talk about references, unless we ensure that we eradicate this, and it is quite okay to not give a reference to somebody that has got this type of practice and this type of incidents that occurs, because it will just perpetuate itself, and we need to be much more guarded as men. And also not to stand as a group and have groupthink about it, but to stand up and to say that we cannot accept these type of practices in our society. It is not on. Thanks. I know I took more time than needed.
Thank you, thank you. It's Commissioner Butter, and then there's a lady at the back, and then there's another hand here.
Thank you.
Oh, Commissioner Butter is a former commissioner in the Gender Commission. I'm not sure about the years from which the period. Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. You know, some things got me very worried. For instance, in South Africa, it's a myth to talk about ideal families as people have perceived them in the olden days, because you have, you know, the basic unity of society has collapsed in our country. Who constitutes households? Grandmothers, as it was mentioned, child-headed households, and women-headed. Some of them had men, but were left in the lurch. And then you're talking about these ideal men that we would like to see. Wow. But with this toxic masculinity and patriarchy, we are very far from it, say. Because, you know, I'm sorry, we are riddled with a pandemic, yet GBV in South Africa. And who are the perpetrators? Men. And as we have these different kinds of families, we must also accept that we will have a woman and a woman being the parents, a man and a man being the parents. We must stop this thing of stigmatizing and being stereotypical about approaches. Things have changed. We must change. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. My understanding is this session is trying to draw out resolutions from the panel. So I just have a few based on some of the inputs. I have been in Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, DPME, etc. I've been a gender activist since the late 70s. First of all, the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, and I think we all know what femicide means, because we've been discussing it for a very long time. The NSP, it shouldn't be, state organs that use public funds should not be able to opt out of implementing the NSP. It should be compulsory for them. It's not a voluntary thing whether you choose to do it or not. It must be compulsory, and I would like that to be a resolution of this conference, that all state organs, departments, public entities, state-owned enterprises must integrate the NSP into their strategic plans, their APPs, their budgets. We should also look at legislating compliance with gender equality, so that, because 30 years later, it can't just be, oh, well, I'll do it if I feel like it. Or I'll do it, because Esther said I should do it. No. Organs of state, people who are getting paid salaries from public funds, it's their obligation to implement the Constitution. As was indicated, the state must. And I like that one. Thank you for that. And then finally, also about funding, because we can talk a lot, but if it isn't in the plans, if there's no funding, it won't happen. Government must ensure adequate funding for the GBV Council and the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And then the last input from the side.
Thank you. I'm Phumzile Ndlovu. I'm wearing two hats. I represent the KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council, funded by the UNFPA, and I'm also the director of Bridging the Gap, funded by AIDS Foundation. I just want to speak about two things, but first of all, I wish to humbly acknowledge the role of the CGE in KwaZulu-Natal. With their limited staff, they have managed to provide legal clinics in deep rural communities. And we've been dealing with the issues of incest by the traditional leader who committed an incest to his biological daughter in a traditional, in a royal family in KwaZulu-Natal. So it's a pity Sizanele is not here, but I just want to acknowledge the support of the CGE, because the population that is left behind living in rural areas, their constitution is social norms and cultural practices and religion. But no one reads the Constitution to them. We know that our Bible, Constitution, is a therapy, umthetho uyelapha. So two recommendations. I just want to appreciate Sis Esther Maluleke, who spoke about GBVF strategy. And on pillar 1, we would like to recommend Isigodi model, linking Isigodi model with a new traditional court act, and the greater emphasis on the new traditional act, court act, have a greater protection for women and children. And I'm sitting with one of the directors here from AIDS Foundation. They have taken SEYA, which should be implemented by the UN agencies, Global Fund, PEPFAR, at a global level. SEYA stands for Protection from Sexual Exploitation, Abuse and Harassment. So we have taken SEYA to Isigodi model, to the House of Traditional Leadership, so that the houses of traditional leadership in KwaZulu-Natal have policies that are documented in their walls that protects women and children. So I would like to invite Usis Esther to look into taking or upscaling Isigodi model first in KZN and then upscaling to other provinces. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. A round of applause for all our contributors. I'm now going to hand over to the panelists. Each will have 2 minutes just to reflect on the recommendations that were given in this session. Thank you.
Colleagues, again, good afternoon and thanks for the comments and recommendations. And I'm going to be very quick, starting with the issue around Isigodi model. It's a pity, you know, when you don't have sufficient time, sometimes you don't even tell talk about all the work that you do. Already what she's recommending, she's saying with Isigodi model, we are already working with KwaZulu-Natal. Remember I said we are piloting the dealing with gender-based violence as if it's a pandemic. And that's where we are piloting. We have already had a consultation. And the beauty of Isigodi model, coming to Memabatu's comment about evidence-based model, we recognize what she said, and we took a principled decision as a department, but working with partners, civil society organizations, that we need to pair, because there's a lot of good work that is happening in our communities, where people are trying to do their best to address the issue of gender-based violence. But often, the models or the work that they do is not recognized because it's not so-called evidence-based or evidence-informed. So what we are doing in partnership with EU is that model that she's talking about, already it's paired with is it KZN University or whatever?
It's KwaZulu-Natal Christian Council.
Yes. But the point I want to make is they've partnered with an academic institution so that as they implement, they also do applied research. So that we move away from this thing of saying, no, it's not evidence-based, it's... So what she's saying, we've already agreed with the KwaZulu-Natal. We're working with the Premier's office, and that's what we're going to do to support them to scale. But it's not the Isigodi model only. We are looking also for those kind of innovations, and we are willing to partner so that, especially in terms of applied research too. So I thought I should respond to that quite comprehensively. But my last point, I appreciate the comments that were made, well heard, including the issue of what the institution, Annette said about institutionalization. And I know you don't want to hear this because you've heard it so many times. But the reality is, if government doesn't institute the work that we are doing into the, forget about it. That's why we've spoken about it for 30 years and nothing happens. The reality is, if it's not planned for, it's not budgeted for, period. And we'll never get the kind of finding we are looking for. It's slow, but we've started. And remember, these things that we are talking about are structured, and there's transformation that needs to happen beyond the plans. It's a change of minds, because people that are making decisions about giving us resources are men in government, they're heading institutions. So we shouldn't be surprised that we're not getting what we want. I thought I should make that point to just emphasize what I said earlier. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So much has been said, and in summary, when the ideal fails us, we must be very careful not to abandon the ideal. We really mustn't abandon the ideal. And the ideal man, most boys want to be good men. Most men want to be good men. But they don't arrive at adulthood accidentally as good men. We abandon teaching and training and inspiring and motivating men at our peril. Men that are damaged are far more dangerous than women that are damaged. Men that are damaged have testosterone, have drives that cause huge damage. We are on the ground throughout this nation, on the ground in communities, in taverns, schools, universities, homeless communities, with teams of men that are running healing conversations. This is happening. You know, we must be careful not to say none of this is happening. It's happening. We have had men in our conversational groups confessing to being nkapis, and repenting of this, confessing to planning to murder their wives and their children and then commit suicide, and abandoning this because we're providing a platform of men that are supportive and loving and caring and allow men to speak, and we're teaching them what it means to be a man. We cannot heal this problem by focusing purely on saying it's up to the mothers. As I said earlier, single mothers are heroes in this nation. Heroes. They've held things together prior to the end of apartheid and subsequent to that. Heroes. But they cannot do it alone. And men want to be good men. Boys want to grow up to be good men. But we need to teach them. We need to train them. The ideal for society, and history has shown this throughout the world, the ideal is an intact family unit. Now, of course, as my sister there pointed out, that intact family unit can be different, can look different, and that's okay. But an intact, loving, caring family that has both the masculine and the feminine influence on both the boy and the girl is what makes a family whole. I'll tell you an example. My daughter had surgery when she was 2 years old, heart surgery. And when she went into the theater, I said to the doctor, please, she was petrified. Can I go into the theater with her? They allowed me to. They don't normally. I held her in my hands as she went under anesthetic. And she fell asleep in my arms. And luckily, the technology is amazing now. Instead of open heart surgery, it's a catheter into the vein. She came out. I was there with her. A month later, we were at my house having a gathering with some guests and family, and she was holding onto my knee, as young girls do. And one of my friends said to her, Blythe, I believe you were in hospital recently. And she looked up and said, yes, my heart was broken, she said. But my daddy fixed it. And I realized there and then that I held my daughter's heart in my hands. I did. And I held my son's heart in my hands, and how I pitched up as a man. Now, let me tell you, most men want to be that man. But they're emasculated, they're unemployed, they were unfathered, they grew up in a devastating situation. And we have the guts to call them trash. They're not trash, man. They are hungry young men who need older men to teach and mentor and love and care for them. I do a lot of work at schools. High school boys are struggling. We must never stop what we're doing to empower women, never ever. We must escalate that, but we must focus on the boy child, because the boy child growing up wounded will destroy our nation, and we need to fix him, and they want to be good.
I promise I won't take long. I think most of the inputs that were made are actually quite spot on. And I think we may not necessarily maybe believe that or agree that they are well articulated, but I think it's exactly because there's a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. Anything that is straightforward or simple, we see it as that is what has led us to this challenge that we have. Because I think sometimes we simplify things that are actually very complicated, one. But secondly, we normalize things that shouldn't be normalized. I think for me, it's like the importance of fatherhood is there. We can never deny that. And I think we can never deny the fact that we need everyone on board. I don't think there's any one of us who can say, I was never influenced by a good man, by a good woman, whatever, or by a good uncle or somebody in our lives. Some of us, we lost our father when we were very young, and my mother had to bring us up. It was a car accident, basically. She did remarry, but you're an equally good man. And I'm just saying, for me, and that's why I always say to my kids or everyone else to say, I take my name quite seriously. Because for me, the surname Marumo that I'm holding on, it seems to represent something. That's what we should be giving our children, to believe that their identity, whoever they are, it doesn't matter what, it makes them. And I think for me, it's about, again, if we look at the whole and look at family values, and it doesn't matter whether it's a man or a woman or whatever, it's not that, but it's about those family values. I think let's not try to simplify things too much. It's complex, and I think that's all that I can say. For now, CGE, well done. And I'll urge that whoever doesn't take to the NSP, I still believe that people need to get fired. We cannot go along making excuses for why things are not done in this country. It's unacceptable. That's all.
Right. So my contribution, after having heard the discourse, is, part of healing means telling the truth. And I think one of the things that we fail to do in these 30 years of democracy is to tell the truth about where this violence in our society stems from. Where is it located? Because the gruesomeness of the violence that we experience, the manifestations of the violence, come from our history. Colonization, the culture that these traditional leaders are trying to advocate for doesn't even come from South Africa. It was part of the colonial regiment used to dismember African families. And today the leaders of our African communities are the ones perpetuating colonization and colonial thoughts. And until we are willing to have a very uncomfortable conversation to say, where does colonization begin and our Africanness end? Until we're willing to have that engagement, we're not going to move forward. That is the beginning of our healing process, is to say, actually, this culture, these traditions, these practices are not our own. Can we please let them go? Because they're not going to progress our society. My last point, really, folks, is that I've really been concerned about the trajectory around how we resource the fight against gender-based violence. In 2019, queer people, women, girls, independent activists, civil society protested outside of JSE. And we did this because we wanted to make a symbolic representation of where capital lies in South Africa and why this capital has not held itself accountable in the fight against gender-based violence. Now, we managed to get to a place whereby there was some fund that was established, but we were kicked out of the process. And then all of a sudden, down the line, there's the GBV Fund Response 1. I don't know what, GBVF Response Fund 1. My question is, from that 1.6 billion that was mentioned by our president to this GBVF Response Fund 1, where is the money? Who are these organizations that can actually say that they have been impacted by this money that apparently came from government and has been resourced? And what has been the tangible impact of that resourcing for our civil society organizations, faith-based organizations, our communities at large? And until we are brave enough to call out leaders in the private sector, in our government, to say, where is the money, where is it going to, we're not going to move forward. Because as Ma'am Esther has said, we can have the evidence-based interventions, but if there's no money available, it's not going to be rolled out. So we must not be afraid to say, to fight gender-based violence, we need money. Where is the money? So the next step from here is for the CGE to spearhead, not just be part of the conversation, but to spearhead an accountability engagement around the funding and resourcing of the fight against gender-based violence and femicide. The private sector must be there, government leadership, decision makers must be there, civil society must definitely be there, and development agencies must be there. Thank you.
Can we give them a round of applause as they take their seats?